So, this song is about love, I mentioned. Jarabi. I would like very much if you could join us on this song. We are Jarabi. We are Jarabi. We are Jarabi. We are Jarabi. For those that can do two things at the same time, to clap and sing, yeah, or half.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are joining us from. You're very welcome to our webinar, which is a research dissemination webinar on a study that was carried out by PDA Ghana and EdTech Hub. We are so glad that you joined in, and thank you for being on time as well. We apologize for the few minutes delay in beginning. This is supposed to be a virtual meeting place for both government and non-government stakeholders of education. And so we appreciate each and every one of you, wherever you are coming from, your various organizations. At some point in the program, we will have some time to discuss and to share ideas. And we're hoping that you would share with us which organization you are coming from when you do so. We really would like to hear your thoughts. Kindly note that as we have these discussions, we are also aiming to come up with a policy brief based on the ideas that we share today. So do feel free to air your views, your opinions, your experience, so that we can all benefit from everything that goes on today. Thank you all. We want to begin quickly by welcoming everyone again, but particularly our partners from EdTech Hub. We are privileged today to have the Ghana Country Lead, Kate Radford, on call with us, and she will be sharing the opening remarks. EdTech Hub is an organization that has been involved in education, particularly education technology, all over the world, but also particularly in Ghana for a number of years. Kate, are you on with us?
I'm certainly on.
You're very welcome. We're glad to have you on board.
Okay, and thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be at this event today. I wish I was actually in Accra with you, but hopefully it won't be too long before I'm there. Well, greetings everybody, and thank you for spending the time this morning or this afternoon to be with us. On behalf of EdTech Hub, I would like to welcome you all to this dissemination webinar of the voices and evidence from end users of the Ghana Learning Television and Ghana Learning Radio and Reading Program. And it's research that was commissioned by the EdTech Hub and led by our esteemed colleagues, Participatory Development Associates, who are hosting today. Now, as we all know and will all be aware, governments and relevant education stakeholders have made significant efforts to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on Ghana's education system. And in all of these efforts, one thing was quite consistent, which is that by adopting education technology in a responsible way and adapting for context, adapting for the needs of teachers, learners, and the education system more generally, you can improve the quality of education in Ghana. The other obvious thing that integrating more technology does is actually help support Ghana's ambitions to become part of the digital economy. Now, just to tell you a small little bit about the Education EdTech Hub, it's a global non-profit research partnership which has the goal of empowering people and specifically policymakers by giving them the evidence they need to make the decisions about how to effectively deploy education technology, not for education technology's sake, but in order to improve the learning outcomes of the children of each particular country. And to this end, at the EdTech Hub, we provide technical assistance, innovation experimentation, which is where we look at very specific elements and challenges of implementation of education technology. And also we do research, of which this is part, into what works for whom and in which context. And as part of this research portfolio in Ghana, we partnered with PDA to research how Ghana has used television and radio during the COVID-19 pandemic and the effectiveness of that in making education available to a large number of users, particularly girls, and also learners with disabilities and those out of school in Ghana. This dissemination webinar, which I think is a very exciting piece of research, not just for Ghana, but also globally, presents many interesting findings. And from these findings today, I believe that you'll learn about how long-term school closures created learning losses and increased dropouts, which won't be new to you. But what is very interesting is how television and radio can be or was or could be used to support individual teachers in creating learning opportunities as they would like to based on their own classroom realities. Also looks at the very important role of domestic commitments of children and also how income levels affect how children can access remote learning opportunities such as radio and television. We'll also see how the benefits and challenges of using television and radio actually supported learners or the challenges they had where it was not so successful. Beyond these direct findings into how programs actually worked, I think what we also will see is that there are very strong considerations coming out of the research, considerations that policymakers, education stakeholders, and innovators will be able to use. And a couple of these, I don't want to give the game away, I don't want to tell too much that will be spoken about later, but a couple of very key things came through for us. One is creating awareness is key. You really need to ensure that there's a structured and continuous manner of creating this awareness. You also need to invest in strengthening the engagement between schools, communities, and homes. So it's very important to look at the whole system, the whole world of the child as it was when he or she is learning. Also need to really make sure that you take into account teacher capacity, teacher motivation, and the requisite technology innovation structures, but also the capacity building skills that they would like to use themselves and the potential they have to teach themselves those. Moving on to PDA now, we would really like to thank PDA for joining hands with us to generate this evidence. We really think it speaks to the ability of the national research community in Ghana to generate relevant evidence on the deployment of education technology. As I said before, not just for Ghana, but we see that this kind of research is also very interesting and useful beyond Ghana's shores. And as we go through this webinar, members of PDA will unpack a lot of the conversations that we at EdTech Hub look forward to engaging you with, the attendees more during this webinar, but also moving forward. This engagement is very important to us as it will give us as EdTech Hub very strong insights in how to better position our support to policymakers and education stakeholders in Ghana as we expand our portfolio there. Thank you, PDA, and I'll now hand it over to you to actually talk about the very interesting research that you've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Kate. We're really glad for those words. And like you said, we want to hear from the researchers now. We have one of the lead researchers with us, Mr. Raymond Hodor from Participatory Development Associates. And just a quick reminder to all those who are participating with us that this webinar is being live streamed on Facebook, on our PDA Facebook page at PDA Ghana, and also on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is PDA TV. So do feel free to check those out a little later on for the recording as well. Mr. Hodor, we are ready to hear from you.
Good.
While we are waiting for Raymond to join us, just want to welcome everyone once again and remind us all of the purpose of our gathering today. We are aiming to discuss research that was conducted on EdTech-based Ghana. We are assessing the effectiveness of the Ghana Learning TV program and engagement program. Raymond,
Good one, everybody. I'm the assistant. I'm the assistant program coordinator. All right. Yeah, sorry about that. So all good now. My name is Raymond Hodo, and I'm the assistant program coordinator at PDA with the research, evaluation, and learning unit. And as rightly said by Asida, I was one of the lead for this research, interesting research that we conducted during the COVID period. I mean, we are still in COVID anyway. So my presentation is just going to touch on the background and then the research questions that we had in mind when carrying out this study. Also talk about how we conducted the study as well as the findings. And my last thing I'll talk about is some recommendations that we emerged from the research findings, so the evidence that we gathered. All right, so I mean, the research was basically to gather the voices. So I think during 2019, we were hit by COVID-19, and I think everybody here on this call could attest to the fact that you could see that things around you were changing. things have to be done differently one way or the other. So the way COVID affected us individually and everybody, I think it affected education as well, not only in Ghana, but worldwide. And there was a need to, think about how to continue teaching and learning, even though we're in COVID crisis. And so as part of we're enshrined in the COVID-19 Coordinated Education Response Plan that was put together by Ministry of Education, GS, and government, was plans or strategy to deploy teaching through remote and virtual platforms. That's TV, radio, and then the internet. So for internet, you have the iBox, iCampus, and others. Then for radio, we had the Ghana Learning Radio and Reading Program. And then for TV, it was the Ghana Learning Television. When at the time, we had other remote learning programs existing, but these other programs were more like nationwide programs that were rolled out because it was being broadcast by Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, that's GBC. And during the COVID, it was more of a necessity to close schools to curb the spread of COVID. So this was done. So I don't think there was any better time to introduce such programs. However, we also knew or already knew from other studies, part was also done by staffs of PDA, particularly Adam and Clement, where we also found, access, availability of some resources, particularly radio and TV, even in not every household had access to those or own a TV or a radio. If you look at the rural and then urban difference, even in urban areas, not every house would have. So then that should kind of give you a picture how it would be like in rural areas. So we had that at the back of our mind. So the thought was knowing that this thing is there, and then there's this resource gap, and government have also introduced such a wonderful program to address the disruptions that COVID caused, or at the time that children were at home and then needed to engage them with on the lost hours. Well, how was the program being used? So we came out with our research questions, and then one of them was to look at how the Ghana Learning TV and radio interventions were meeting the needs of all, particularly the marginalized. So aside that was one of our research questions. We're also looking at the accessibility. How are people able to access these programs from various locations, rural, urban, all over the country? So we also looked at that. And then we also were interested in if the program has had any effect or was able to enhance educational outcomes in a way. We were also interested in that as part of our research question. And then largely, we're also saying, how can technology be used to, in the midst of all this, or where in a period where we have a pandemic and then we are supposed to adapt or find new ways of doing things, especially within the education sector? How can technology be used to ensure inclusivity and as well enhance teaching and learning outcomes? So those were our focus for this study. How we carried out the study, it was we made sure it was participatory. So participatory in the sense that we didn't have to just go and then ask questions and get answers and come back, but it was more of us interacting with the people and listening to them. Because if you look at the heading of the research, the voices of the end users, so it was more about them. We wanted to hear more from them and take their views into account, especially because we also felt that at the end of this research, should be able to come out with some policy briefs to direct some of the programming within the education space. So it was participatory, and then we used qualitative approach, purely qualitative. So we had our guides designed and used that to conduct focus group discussion, conducted key informant interviews, we did in-depth interviews. But before we set out to the field or went to the field, we made sure we had spoken to some key actors, state and non-state actors within the education space. So we spoke with the Ministry of Education, since they are also part of, they rolled out, together with GS and government rolled out the intervention. We spoke with them to have a better understanding of how these programs are being rolled out or deployed to ensure that everybody benefits. The goal or the purpose of initiating such programs were achieved. We spoke with them. There were other non-governmental organizations that we also spoke with, particularly I think Plan International and others who also share their views. So that also kind of like help us to put the research into perspective, and then as well looked at our questions or interview guides again, and then reframe questions that we already know there were thought in some adjustment. Then we proceeded to the field to collect primary data, and from over there we tried to engage head teachers, engage teachers, we engage learners of different kinds. Because if you look at, we engage learners of different kinds, and then we also followed up with some of the parents of the learners we interacted with to collect, further information, just to have some holistic assessment and understanding of the whole issue. So I think in all, it was a good experience, and we were able to gather quite a lot of qualitative, rich data, which shaped our analysis. So when we go back and we looked at the data, we were using content and thematic analysis. So from the transcript we gathered, coding we did, and all those things, we were able to come up with some broad themes and sub-themes from which we were able to generate findings around. And we used the qualitative software called MassQDA for such analysis. In terms of research sites where we conducted the study, we were looking at various geographical locations. We know in terms of economic strength, there's so much variety between the south, the north, and even the middle belt of Ghana. So the idea was to make sure we know we can't visit every region in Ghana, but at least we were sampling from various areas across the country. So from the southern belt, we selected Greater Accra region, and then from the middle, we selected Ashanti, and then from the northern belt, we selected northern region. However, we were also interested in the rural-urban dynamics and how this could affect the use or access of the remote learning program, that is the GLTV, Ghana Learning Radio and Reading Program. So we were also interested in selecting rural and then urban districts, which we did, because even though we have within rural and urban districts, there are still differences. So we're interested in seeing that from different locations. So as you can see on my screen, we selected Lankwantana and Ada West for Greater Accra, Kumasi Metro and Afram Plains for Ashanti, then Temale Metro, and then Anumba South for Northern region. Some of the districts, what also informed some of the selection of the district was also the academic performance that we've seen in some of the reports that we reviewed, particularly in Anumba South. I think there was a year that in terms of PEC performance, they really did well, even though it's a rural district. So we were keen in finding out what was being done different, or how was such a program meeting their needs. So those with the double asterisk are the urban districts, and then those with the single asterisk is the rural district. Now to the communities, you realize that for every district, we had 3 communities. We were thinking of how representative our sample could be. So we thought of, okay, there are quite a number of communities in a district. So how can we spread out the research to cover more grounds so that we're able to get views from all sorts of people, different kinds of people within the district. So what we did was we selected a community in the district capital as one of our focus areas to conduct the study. And once we selected that, or once we identified that community, we selected another community to the west of the district capital and then another to the east of the district capital. So that's how come you see that in every district, we're able to visit 3 communities in the district. So those are the districts that we visited. Now, I already mentioned the kind of people we interviewed. So I think we spoke with teachers, and head teachers and teachers were mainly key informant interviews. So the numbers we did is what is being shown on your screen. We also interacted with different kinds of learners. I did mention that. So learners in school, at the time that we're conducting the study, after school closure was over and then schools had reopened. So school were in session. So we're interested in people who have gone back to school. And then we're also interested in people who were in school and also had some form of disability. I mean, they were interested in people who had disability that we could communicate with. So definitely not people who could not see or could not hear, because there was no way we could do signage or even communicate with such people. So, I mean, there were people with some form of physical deformity in a way. And then we were also interested in people within the particular age range, which is 12 to 17 years, because from those ages, they are likely to be within the classes in which these programs were targeting. Then we also interested in children out of school. What we define as children out of school was people who, prior to school closure, were in school, but now that schools were reopened, they've not been able to go back to school. We targeted them as well. And then from this set of learners of children that we engaged, we followed up with some of their parents to engage them to understand how the role they play, how they also, what their view and take on the program largely, and if they have been a beneficiary of such programs, how it has helped them. So we did that as well. We in the regions, we also spoke to some radio station, because for the Ghana Learning TV, with GBC signal all over there, like having a national satellite or something, it's easy to get the channel across the country. But for the radios, I think you have to work to various local radio stations to be able to broadcast the content. So we were key in finding out if there's been some engagement and how they have also seen those interventions and how the implementation or rolling out of the program was. I think at the end of it, we had over 290 people that we engaged, if I should add the ones we conducted at the national level as well. Now, it wasn't as smooth as we would always expect. But I mean, as a researcher, you would expect some of those things to come your way. So we have to very adaptable and innovative in our approach. One of the limitations or challenges we faced was we couldn't get permission from GES to conduct the interviews in schools. In schools, children would have been under the care of the teacher, the head teacher. So once GES if GES have given us an approval, once we send that to the schools, it would have been easy to access these learners that we were interested in. So, but it wasn't the case, and it was because of COVID protocols. That's why GES did not grant us the permission. So we had to think around it, and we said, okay, fine. If that's the case, we are going to, instead of going to schools, we rather decided to do it at the community level, where we selected communities, as I've explained earlier. And I think the good thing that even came out of this was when we brought learners together, we realized that we even had people coming from different schools, compared to if we were to go to a school, we would have had a set of learners from a particular school and not necessarily others. But once we engaged learners at the community level, we had all sorts of learners from different schools, which also enriched the kind of data that we collected. We were not able to interview some national and community level people that we targeted. And even though we scheduled meeting with them, I'm sure we also had probably other things, and this also conflicted with the study, so we're not able to speak with them. However, we made sure that, the exam key actors that are within the education space we spoke with them, and then they added their voice to the study. Then the other challenge or limitation we faced was mobilizing people with disability in urban areas. Urban areas are kind of, we kind of like use the snowballing technique to identify people or learners with disability in communities, because we were not able to have access to school. So we had to ask anybody in the community who has a disability going to school. But then they'll show you. So once they show you, then you go and you take permission from the parents, tell them the purpose and everything about the research. Then you also seek they themselves their consent before you proceed the interview or the engagement. But in the urban cities, it was really difficult to identify them. So if you look at the table that I shared earlier, you realize that the number of learners with disability is quite low. And then in general, we also had the COVID was still there, and we ourselves, we needed to take precautions as well. So on the field, needed to make sure we're in those packs. We also had to make sure we carry sanitizer in where we lodge and all the things that we were supposed to take care of, and also allay any fears of what COVID might have on anybody. So we took all that into consideration and made sure we adhere to the national health safety protocols on that. So I mean, those were some of the challenges or limitations that we faced. However, managed to maneuver our way around it. The next thing I would want to talk about is some of our key findings. Because it was a qualitative study, we were able to generate 3 broad themes, and under each theme, we were able to come up with some key findings. And one of the broad themes that we generated was to look at the teaching and learning during and post-school closure. So now schools were reopened, so we're looking at the before, like during school closure, and then after school closure. What was the teaching and learning like? Basically, I think most schools were just saying, oh, our schools, we don't have any infrastructure to engage in remote or virtual learning. So therefore, we just have to obey government's directives and then close attend. Some teachers who had also moved from their parents' home to other areas because of their occupation also had to return home. And all this kind of like distorted learning. So for most areas, learning was not being done from the school side. But we also realized that some teachers, some teachers took it upon themselves, both in rural and urban areas, to kind of like keep their people or learners engaged during the period. And I think one of the virtual platforms that they used was WhatsApp. You must see that the WhatsApp was used more in urban areas than rural areas, as expected. So the WhatsApp became a platform where they could just send some form of assignments or receive assignments and all that. And one of the issues that is if it's definitely need to have a smartphone, and just like not having television and radio, not every house has a smartphone. So some children think they have to visit their friends, share some of those things. So it kind of also promoted, joint learning, co-learning as well. So, but it was not that much. I think it was about 11% in the rural area and then about 22% in urban areas. Now we also found that during the period it was more like a fortune for some caregivers or guardians, especially in the rural areas, because children were now home, they were not going to school, so they had full access to them. There was an opportunity for them to either help them with the activities that they do, be it farming or managing a store or something, and or some of them even had to even be sent to marketplaces and other places to engage in economic activities. For some of the children, they themselves even had to take the initiatives to move to some, for example, fishing communities to be able to, fish and get some income from that to enable them maybe return to school when school reopened. So we realized that about 78% of the learners that we engaged, it did take part in limited or no learning at all, as compared to 29% in the urban areas. So more people in the rural were being used for this domestic gains as well. And as a result of that, when you realize that one of the consequences of the school closure was poor academic performance, especially among those who were not very much engaged in learning activities during the school closure period. And because some also have moved into other sort of economic activities, also were working, some had also moved into apprenticeship. At the time when school reopened, at the point within that time, it was more what they were doing was more gainful compared to going to school. So they were not able to return back to school. I mean, others were also, there were some issues of teenage pregnancy and then other deviant behaviors like smoking, which was also found. Now, when school reopened, we also, when we asked about that, we realized that those who knew about the Ghana Learning TV and then the Ghana Learning Radio and Reading program, some had incorporated those things onto their timetable, and then were using or tuning in, especially to the radio program, and making use of the work or activity book that accompanied the program. So during those periods, they tune in, and then the children get to answer some of those things because they were not able to effectively use them during the school closure, either because they didn't know about it or they didn't have access to it to take part in such programs. So about 15% of the teachers and head teachers that we talked about indicated blending the usual classroom with this remote learning when school reopened. Now, the second team we also generated was largely on focusing on the GLTV and then the GLRRP. And as earlier mentioned, it's very key. I mean, these are very innovative program, and I think it was also introduced at the timely, like the time it came was also good. But then we realized that not everybody knew about such programs. So for every 10 respondents that we interviewed, about 4, that's like about 40%, they have knowledge or know about what the GLTV or the Ghana Learning Reading and Radio program was about. And that's, once you don't know about it, definitely you're already out of then assessing it. And then also we also realized that people who knew about it does not necessarily mean that they all access it. So even though 4 out of 10 they didn't know about it, not the remaining, all the 6 did not access the program. However, those who were able to access the program, which we are calling the beneficiaries, that's the learners themselves, teachers, parents, they indicated it was positive from the kind of narrations and testimonies that they give. For learners in particular, it was more about revising some of the things that were taught in school, learning new things. So when they went back to school, things that were being taught in the classroom were rather like fishing for them. For teachers, some teachers also indicated that one of the problems they face in school was access to teaching and learning resources. So therefore, through the program, they were able to take some lessons from what was being telecast and also use that in their classroom. So it served as a form of teaching and learning resource for them. It also showed them how to even go about teaching some subjects, which was very something we found. And then parents also said, I mean, it was also nice because they made them kind of like reflect on their school days, seeing some of those things like, hey, I do remember this, or I kind of like remember we were being taught this. So it was nice. And also they also felt that through those programs, they were able to reduce educational costs. Because during the school closure, most of the learning approach was either through private tuition, that is, you get a private teacher to come to your home, come and teach your word, or you have a close relative doing the teaching at home. So, and then the private teaching comes with costs. So for those who knew about the program and I ensured that their ward or their children took part, realized that they didn't have to hire a private teacher to do the teaching for them again. However, in all this, I think they also acknowledge that when the parents themselves had a role to play and then to provide the children with the things they need, the books, the pen, the table, even instruct them to watch it, even allow them to watch it. Whilst others use theirs for economic gains, others do more ensuring that whenever it was time for the program, their children sat behind the TV or had their workbook and were able to take part in the program. Beyond that, we also found that for learners with disability, it kind of like from the narrative, we understood that it was like they were benefiting more. One, because based on their condition, they were mostly free at the time compared to somebody who is very well-able person who can do some chores and house activities. But then once the resources were available, then all they had to do was just to sit behind the TV, particularly, and listen to. Of course, most people indicated they prefer the TV because of the view visuals, but then they needed to have the resources. And we found that in a particular area, in Adan West particularly, due to the intervention of Plan International, where they were able to distribute some television sets to people with disability, they kind of like enable them have access to this program, which was good. But then again, even within those who had access or were given some of this TV, one learner with disability shared with us that he or she was not able to mount the TV pole and did not get anybody to do that for him because of his condition, which was very sad to hear because he has the resource, but yet still no access because of his condition. Then we also realized that the people were also using creative and innovative means of increasing access, particularly in the north and then in Ada. We realized that in the north, where the religion is predominantly Muslims, they had the radio content put on a pen drive, and then they were broadcasting from their mosques. So what this means is that once it was being broadcast from the mosques, so that the homes surrounding the mosque could hear them, and then the idea was for parents to sit with their children and then help them. Those who were from afar had to come closer to the mosque to listen in and other. But the disadvantage, the issue was that they were not able to sustain this for a very long period. And also children who had come from afar didn't have anyone to assist them in going through the activities as would have been done if maybe they were at home and then a parent would support them. In Ada, we found that, knowing the economic strength of the area and knowing that people don't have access to TV and radio, one head teacher did to get the content and then set up a sound system on a football park and then played it from there. So you have people coming around, sitting around, just take part. So these are some ways that they also tried in their own ways to increase access. In terms of, we also realized that the timing when the program was aired was also a challenge for some people because I think in a day they tried to show lessons for all the classes from class 1 to JHS 3. So it means you have to wait for your time to access that. And then sometimes when it's time for you to watch, probably that's when your parents need you. So you will not be able to get access to that. And then also you have one TV or one radio at home and daddy wants to watch something, your sister or your siblings watch something else. So that was also there. And of course, once you're at home, could you get me water, get this for me? All those things were like, by the time you come, the lesson is still going on. And there was no way you could go back to the content and access what was taught. So if you stood up for even a minute, what was said within that minute, there was no way to get it back. Unless maybe you were able to time when the program will be repeated to be able to watch, and that was a problem. And then the difficulty understanding some of the lessons was one of the issues that were also identified. For some of the children, they know about it, they start watching it, but then once they get lost and there's no one at home to probably guide them or put them or explain things to them, then what they do was just to change the channel to the movie where they are showing some movie and have fun. And also there was power outage in some areas. And then even in some areas, particularly in the northern part, there were no radio stations in some communities, so therefore the signal was not there, and they couldn't even access it. Yeah, so this was some of the key findings we found in regard to, particularly on the learning TV and then the radio program. Then I think we also made it open for them to make suggestions on how they think the program can be improved. And so we plotted that, and you realize that, first of all, knowing about it and how to assess it. I think particularly they were talking how to assess all these programs was something that the people really talked about, because we spoke to some parents or some key people, and they were like, it's now that we are hearing about it. So if we had known about it, we would have used it because it was like a very interesting or good program, but they didn't know about it. So awareness creation was key. We also realized that having the device was also key, because once you don't have the device, it was difficult. I mean, some parents, one way or the other, happen to get the content on their smartphone. They share that with their children, even though they didn't have TV at home, but not every parent had that opportunity. Then there were some aspects of the program that also thought could be changed, like how some of the lessons are delivered. Then they also talked about if the lessons could be available on other platforms, where if you're able to miss a program, you can return to it and then watch it. At the time, I think most people didn't master the timetable, and therefore didn't know when their lessons were going to be telecast. So what it means is you just have to watch it the time, then watch. Then others also feel, well, since it's been helpful and it should be integrated into main school activities. That way, teachers, because we realized that for those who were able to access, it was also because their teachers or head teachers kept instructing them to watch or tune into those programs whilst they are at home. So they thought if it was integrated into the school activity, they understand better. I think the radio one was done in the local languages, so people easily relate. And a few also did mention that some of the programs should be in other languages so that they can. Because, I mean, if you've ever visited our education system, some schools in Ghana, you realize that even people in DHS or even some in SS are still not even able to communicate clearly or even understand some of the things that are being said in the classroom. So teachers have to combine both the local dialect and English during teaching of lessons. So that was also raised. And then the case where parents have to go to work or have to be somewhere else and there was no help. Some also felt that if there were other people in the community, people could also assist should people have issues, kind of like explain things to them. That would also help. About 1.8 also did suggest that they include all subjects, because the GLTV was focusing more on maths, social science, and then science, math, science, and social studies. The last thing we also generated was broadly how to enhance teaching and learning through EdTech. And we realized that the availability of resources was key. And if you want to access a radio program or a TV program, it's just not going to be possible if they don't have the required resources like TV and radio. So those things are key. And you also need at our school systems to see how those could be done, and especially learning from this research where people decide to adopt some innovative. You can also think of how to upskill or how to redefine or polish those practices and incorporate that into our system to ensure that people who do not have some of this can also benefit from such programs. We also realized that parents had a lot to do during the period, because the children were spending, parents of caregivers, children were spending most time with them, and some parents themselves were even the reason why children could not access the program. So that's also something that we need to look at. Parents who were also conscious or knew about the program also made sure that their children, even if they were not at home, They also, some even sat with their children to watch the program together, and then they were the ones explaining things to them, and then it made the children also enjoy it or like the program better. So they also had a role to play. But then again, we realized that the parents also kind of like need support in terms of how to, first of all, support in terms of information about these programs. Because if they don't know about the program, one parent shared that I have TV in my room, but I didn't know about this program. So it was that if I had known about it, I would have made my children watch. So they need to be supported with information so that they are aware of these programs. And EdTech in general, if they are EdTech programs, parents also need to be educated on how to use those programs or how to benefit from those programs at home. I don't know if there's anyone here who will say that any teacher have not impacted his or her life. So I think teachers are doing marvelous jobs, but the issue we identified was that they themselves also lack the resources. They didn't have the skills to even handle a tech intervention. Some teachers did confirm that even how to use virtual platforms like Google Meet and some things that they were not familiar with. And that has been the trend for some time now. And I think we also put look into that and see how we can support teachers in terms of their skills, then the kind of resources they need when we want EdTech to enhance teaching and learning outcomes as well as promote inclusivity. I think the last finding on this slide is point to all of us that EdTech indeed can help promote inclusivity, provided they also have the resources. In where people with disability had the resources, it looked like they were even benefiting more than people who were able. So it's an indication that EdTech can promote inclusivity. However, people with disability or marginalized, or the marginalized group have different needs, and therefore we need some support along the way as they try to engage or access some of these platforms. So my last slide has some recommendations. So among others, I think one of the things that we recommend was to improve awareness around the GLTV and the radio program for the public, particularly parents. But from those who did access, even teachers did confirm that if you assess children, when they return from school, you would realize that some children who took part in the program or did have some form of learning during closure were performing better compared to those who did not. Then we also need to strengthen engagement between school parents, communities. Children, on weekends spend the entire day in the house, who they spend some in school, some in at home. And then therefore there needs to be some collaboration between these various actors, school, communities, parents, or home, in ensuring that EdTech is used to achieve educational outcomes or improve educational outcomes. Ensure that improves inclusivity where the poor, the marginalized, the disabled are also moved into the education bracket. We also need to invest in structure for access to virtual learning platforms. So that's also a recommendation we came up with. And then we also need to build the skills capacity of teachers to support some of this. And some actors within the education space are already taking the initiative where they are training some teachers. But we need to do this to full scale to ensure that everybody, most teachers benefit from this, are able to act on our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond, for that presentation. Certainly a lot of information, and I'm sure that we'll have some time as we discuss and delve a little bit more into the various findings and the recommendations to be able to figure out, how to digest all of this information and make sure that it contributes meaningfully to policy in the education sector in Ghana. I can already see a number of very interesting questions in the chat box. Please feel free to keep them coming. We'll be taking them very soon. But now we want to hand over to Mr. Kofi Asare, who is our discussant for today. He has been working in the educational sector of Ghana and even a number of other countries across the continent for several years, almost 2 decades. And he has been a vocal advocate for education, which is accountable, which is responsive, which is equitable, and actually achieves what it is meant to achieve in raising human capital. And in this vein, I'm sure many of us on this call are familiar with him. He has worked with a sheer multitude of schools, communities, CSOs, international organizations, government agencies. He has been leading in policy design and leading in policy implementation. He is currently serving as the Executive Director for Africa Education Watch, and we are so glad to have him on the call. Mr. Asare, are you with us?
I'm here. Good morning, and I'm humbled by those kind words. I don't know where you found all those words from. Let me say good morning to everyone here. I am happy to be part of this discussion, and thank you to the presenter for sharing such knowledge with us in respect of the effectiveness of the TV and radio schools that governments of Ghana invested in during the genesis of COVID. I must indicate that, as I keep saying, COVID was a blessing and then also a curse. A blessing in the sense that it gave us an opportunity not to continue delaying the deployment of virtual learning systems and technologies to complement in-person education approaches in the country. And we have been able to catalyze that particular process and gotten to the level where we see appreciable development in virtual learning technology and systems, and also its use. I make specific mention of the fact that in our previous research into the deployment of virtual learning programs under the government of Ghana's accelerated program, which was supported by development partners, including DFID, it was obvious that even though TV and radio schools as mediums of virtual learning were aimed at, helping pupils catch up the learning loss occasioned by the closure of schools during COVID, we nearly ended up using the same approach to widen already existing inequality gaps. And that is one interesting thing, one tricky thing about virtual learning. In your bid to use such learning approaches to bridge the learning gaps, you might end up using it to widen already existing inequalities between urban, peri-urban on one side and rural on one side, if the deployment of these interventions is not done with recourse to equity considerations. And you're talking about rural areas where there's no electricity. About 40% of our schools in Ghana do not have electricity. I am in Tamale now. I'm in the Northern region, and I'll just finish making a presentation on electricity situation in the schools in the Northern region, and only about 43% of schools here have access to electricity. And so it means that you are virtually cut out from having any effective TV schooling within such communities because there's no electricity. So that is why virtual learning is a resource, but then again, it can be tricky because you might end up serving the already endowed, quote unquote, areas in this country and not serving the underserved areas. That is why I am happy that against or on the back of the TV school and then the radio school, government introduced the iBox and then the iCampus, but especially the iBox technology, because through the iBox, agencies like Senlos were able to reach senior high schools that had no access to internet, because it provided an opportunity for offline functionalities to be explored and fully exploited to the benefit of teaching and learning. And so I believe that having such offline portals or facilities help to bridge the gap. Yeah. Hello. Hello?
We lost you for a second, but you're back.
Okay, yeah. So I was making a point that having interactive platforms to complement what TV and radio schools bring is great. But we have to be careful not to ensure that the introduction of such interactive platforms are equitable so that it serves the right purpose. And one of such platforms is the Edmodo platform. The Ministry of Education spent about 7 million cedis to acquire the platform on the basis that the platform provided an interactive platform for teachers, parents, and pupils to engage. Unfortunately, as of December last year, less than 0.5% of teachers and pupils were enrolled on the Edmodo platform, which we spent so much on to accommodate close to 8 million. And even in urban areas like Adenta, less than 1% of teachers were enrolled on it. So you find that there is an investment in certain virtual learning systems and technologies without a commensurate demand or appropriate user policies that seeks to mainstream their use within the teaching, within the education service. And it's important that as investments are made into such interventions or programs, it shouldn't be seen as a procurement activity, but rather a facility aimed at ensuring that those who are unable to have direct access to web-based virtual learning are able to access these offline learning management platforms and participate actively because it's supposed to be interactive with their teachers. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that, yes,
Recorded.
So we ensure that the teachers who need the necessary competencies to participate and make virtual learning interactive have the gadgets and then the facilities and the competencies to participate in same, so that it becomes integral within our education system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asai. I'm sorry about the challenges that you were facing, but I believe that we all got what he was sharing. Thank you for those words. We now want to open the floor and allow everyone to feel free to comment, contribute, react, respond, suggest, recommend, anything that would help us all to improve the application of education technology in Ghana. I know we have several representatives from many of our partner firms and education stakeholders in Ghana on the call. We have representatives from Africans, we have representatives from Challenging Heights, Child Rights International, Mr. Charles Tega, who has served for several years with the Ghana Education Service. Even representatives from the British Council Connecting Classrooms, as well as Grace Wood, who is joining us from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office the education advisor over there. So please, let's feel free to share our questions. You can either put them in the chat box, as some of you are already doing, or you can raise your hand so that we call on you. I think a few of the questions that have been asked in the chat box were answered by the researchers. Malek first asked about the focus group discussions for the learners, about how many people and how many respondents were in the focus group discussions. And I believe Raymond has answered him. All right. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question you would like to vocalize yourself. Mawina Hansen, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Mawina. I'm from Practical Education Network, and I'm the Research Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Officer. I think you guys have done a great job with the research. I have two questions. In your key findings, you mentioned that 15% of the teachers and the head teachers you engaged with used the blended approach during the COVID period. I wanted to know if this 15% includes teachers from the rural areas as well, because with the work we do, we know that these teachers have a lot of challenges with internet connectivity and accessibility. So I wanted to know if this 15% included those teachers as well. So that's my first question. And then the second question is also with regards to the key findings. You mentioned that the platform that was created was more beneficial to disabled learners. I wanted you to try and categorize the kind of disabled learners you engaged with, because I'm trying to get a picture of how it improved their learning outcomes, how it was more beneficial to them. So did you have learners who were blind or deaf, or can you try and categorize them for us to have a fair idea of the kind of learners you engage with when it comes to disability? Thank you.
Hi, Mauna. So I think the 15% we mentioned was both in urban and rural area. You know, with the radio program, it was with the radio program they shared. Okay, so with the radio program, they shared an activity book with the schools, and this was supposed to be distributed to the children or to their parents. So because they were not able to use them during the period, either because they could not access the program, when school reopened, some of the teachers thought it was an opportunity for them to make use of those books, even solely because even access to some textbooks or working books was a challenge in these areas. So with a single radio, when the program was being aired, then they make use of the activity book. So this was both in rural and urban areas. In terms of the disability, I did mention that we engage people we could communicate with. So definitely not people who could not see or who could not hear. So these are people who had some form of physical deformity. And then I did mention that the kind of response we got from them gave the indication that they were benefiting more. One being that they didn't have to, in their condition, they didn't have to struggle to go to the classroom. Secondly, they didn't have to feel uncomfortable among others. They were within the comfort of their homes, and then with their people they really easily associate with, like their parents around. So that's kind of like made them feel very relaxed and kind of like enjoy the program. And then also in terms of the hours they got to spend with on the lessons varied compared to those who probably were also engaging in other activities. Thank you.
Sure.
Asada, can I just add a little bit to the because I think Raymond has responded to that. But I mean, well, if you're, I was going to respond to one of Charles Chega's questions, but if you are going to ask it later, then that's fine.
So please go ahead, Clement.
Okay. So I think the Chega has asked very interesting questions. One of three actually. I think one has been responded by Alex. The last one, I'm sure Kofi Asare responded to it himself, which is the name of the platform that Kofi you spoke about. But there was one about learning loss and learning recovery, and whether learning loss was one of the impacts and what schools were doing to recover from some of those losses. I think very interesting one there, and it's technical but also interesting for us as researchers and people who are not like educationists per se. The point about learning loss recovery, and as you know, Charles, is that you don't approach it from individual perspectives, but usually from, you know, as a whole, as a system, the strategies that is done to strategies that are put in place to do to recover some of those learning losses, which obviously is an it begs the question whether there was learning loss at all because of the long closure of schools. There was learning loss due to the number of years, but some of the teachers in many of the schools we encountered were encouraging children to continue to engage virtually as much as possible. And I think Raymond did mention that some teachers were even using WhatsApp platforms and allowing children to watch some of the programs during school hours as well. And I think some teachers were also recording some of the lessons and playing back to students. But also, most importantly, in some of the rural communities, you found that there were community support systems to make sure that households that did not have radio and TV could listen to some of the lessons from the mosques, for instance, or sometimes churches were used, the microphones in mosques, for instance, were used to air some of those lessons for children to catch up. So, I mean, these are all at the community level, and, the little that teachers were doing at the school level were also being done as much as possible. Yeah, and I mean, I think in terms of the household level, as much as the technology devices and the infrastructure were not available for many rural dwellers, I think a few parents were happy to allow cross-learning from household to household and within communities for children to gather and to learn together, which is not quite, like as systemic as you would think, but some little efforts were being done, which I think is commendable. I'm not sure whether we got anything else that can respond to the question of learning loss recovery, but I mean, especially because we didn't officially engage with the schools to have like official conversations with the head teachers and teachers. But at least from the community observation perspectives and speaking with community members who are also students, we could, and also teachers as well, but within the communities, we had a sense of some effort being made. And so that's it. It's for now, really, in terms of that question about learning loss.
So, Clara, just to add to that, I think some head teachers also shared with us that, I mean, when school reopened, I think there was some directive from government that there was, go over some subjects or some curriculum, and then they were. I mean, the issue was, I mean, the time frame they had to go over all those things because people had stayed home for a long period, and then they need to go over all that. So we're more worried about completing the curriculum in the system that the time that allocated. I think that was also done at school level to kind of reach that learning loss. Thank you.
Thank you for adding a voice to that. Let me throw to Mr. Asari the question about the name of the platform that you were referring to. And Mr. Chaga is asking whether it was linked to or it was a standalone facility for either teachers or students.
Yeah, the Edmodo learning management system was or is supposed to be an LMS for teachers, students, and people, and their parents. In fact, Edmodo itself is a free and open source software. I mean,
Okay, I think, yeah, losing him a little again. But he's talking about Edmodo, which is a free and open source software, which I believe can be customized to various learning needs. Okay, if we get him back, I'm sure he would continue. But Jonathan is asking two questions. One has been answered about whether PDA has shared the report with the government. We have done so. But the second question he's asking is which actions stakeholders should put in place to ensure that these recommendations are implemented. And I think that's the purpose of this, meeting. We want to make sure that all the key stakeholders have a voice and join the conversation. How can we make sure that these findings are not just one other thing that has been done? How do we ensure that these are implemented? So the floor is still open.
Yeah, but in terms of recommendations, I think Raymond did highlight a few. If Raymond wants to recap some of them in response to Jonathan's question, that would be good as well.
Okay, then Raymond, back to you.
Yeah, I think I mean, with the recommendation we talk about strengthening, moving, investing, and then building capacity. But I think what I would like to see in response to the question being asked by Jonathan about how do we carry forward this recommendation. That's how I understand and so that we I think by sharing the document with the government, we also intend to use a policy which engage down the actors, then state and non-state actors. But just to catch some of the we talked about improving awareness around it, since there's indication, there's evidence that as beneficial when it's done. We also need to strengthen the collaboration with schools. Since all those parties have viewed the education outcomes. Then we also need to invest in infrastructure. That gap of access or we also need to build this. Remote learning.
Thank you for those recommendations, Raymond. There's another question in the chat box about the access to the intervention, the GLTV and then the GLRRP by students. And Kobina wants to know whether there were gender perspectives to this. Was access the same for males and for females, or did you see any discrepancies or differences? All right. To keep your questions coming in the box. And just a minor housekeeping issue. We do want to make sure that everyone has a little allowance for the data that you used in connecting to the meeting. So please, if possible, kindly use the name that you used for your registration in the Zoom attendance so that we can match your registration number, the number you gave us at registration, to the individual who's logged in. I hope that's okay with everyone. So if you're not using the name that you used for your registration, please just rename it so that we can keep track of that after the webinar.
Is Raymond responding to the other question on gender perspectives?
I think you can begin while he collects his thoughts.
Okay, I mean, I think the in terms of access, a few of the things that characterized the program made it imperative that there will be some of the genders would be at a disadvantage. You know, the timing, for instance, where some of the GLTV, for instance, was aired during some of the programs were aired in the evenings, for instance, when some girls will be busy working, obviously because of the gendered roles in many communities. You find that boys had more time at their hands than girls, so that becomes an issue. You know, there were a few things around the timing as well, which some parents who were keen to let their children watch the program, for instance, thought they would expect a P1 lesson to be at 8 a.m., for instance, and then at 8 a.m. something else is being aired, and that affects the interest. I mean, that's not quite exactly gendered, but that also is an issue that affected interest across the board. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, the few things of access, which is quite general, about devices, connectivity, and other things were the primary things, which made it really quite categorical in terms of made it very obvious that those in the rural areas would be at a disadvantage than those in urban areas, which again is not exactly gendered, but you know, in terms of those are the margins, and as Kofi mentioned, but also as the research also identified, those are the margins were further pushed down because of access constraints. Yeah, so that's where I'll leave it for now.
Okay, yeah, so Clement, I think I was just trying to see if I could get some figures to that, but I think, yeah, what you said is spot on. There were some little difference between gender, but I think it also depends on the kind of activities that they were engaged in when the program was being aired. I think we did see some difference, but there didn't seem to be significant. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We are getting some very interesting feedback and comments from Mr. Charles Aheto Chega, and he is currently an education consultant, but for a number of years before his retirement, he was a former director of Ghana Education Service. Mr. Chega, if you can unmute, we would be glad to hear the words from your own mouth.
Madam, you are very wicked. I was trying to sustain my anonymity, but you have blown my cover. Anyway, let me use the opportunity to say kudos to all the presenters and all those who have, as I said, attempted to handle very difficult situations under the circumstance of the research. But let me say that it's a very bold effort by PDA to try and unearth some of these inherent challenges that we often overlook when we begin to tout a number of interventions in the interest of education for the children. So this research is very good, and I'm also very glad about Kofi's what we call discussant contribution. I mean, he really emphasized the fact that though he didn't mention, due to the poor preparation and coordination of the response in terms of what to do following the closure of schools, we had all of these challenges, even though we had good intentions to try and address and ensure that we sustain a certain level of learning. So it's all food for thought for all of us, and maybe in future we will try and get many of these things done. My responses were essentially to say that, okay, how can we as stakeholders then bring in ensure that the findings from this research is actually implemented. And then I've just proposed that it's important now for us to begin to insist, apart from our unspoken insistence on consultation and expansion of the of stakeholders in terms of what has to be done. We are looking for a more holistic and guided approach that would also be properly coordinated in terms of doing the things that we know will be in the best interest of everybody, parents, learners, and all the people that we have. Because from the research, you could see that the kind of responses that we're getting were not unanimous in terms of the community response. Only very committed communities were doing a lot of best practice things that we could have prepared for while we were trying to implement the program, and therefore provide more opportunities even for those children who did not have access to electricity to benefit from other ways of learning. But it's all because we didn't really, some of these things came as a kind of knee-jerk firefighting response to a children at home. How do we do it? The world is talking about learning loss. So how do we also show that we are our children are not losing their learning, and a whole lot of things. So we didn't really sit down to really constructively go into the details. But I think in future, this is a lesson Kofi is very good at saying that the blessing and the curses of COVID, has made us all aware that we cannot continue to be procrastinating on some of the good ideas that we have. Whenever they occur, we try and get something to do it and then see how we can implement it. The final one, it has to do with the inclusion dimension. I realized that not much was done, not even done. It's not a PDA's issue. Not much was done for creating opportunities for people with disabilities to participate in this whole arrangement, and that was very, very unfortunate. And I think in future we would have to be a little more constructive in terms of how we can engage our brothers with disability and the other forms of interventions that will ensure inclusion, because it is very, very, very shameful that we do a program within the period of the implementation of an inclusive education policy, and then we don't see inclusion. I think that is a real dent on everything that we think we have succeeded in doing during the time schools were closed. But we can address all of that, just as this research has pointed out, that we can come back to the drawing table and see how we can address those things and incorporate them into the system to the best interest of all our children, parents, and teachers. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for blowing my cover.
You're welcome. Thank you for the incredible contributions. And please, the floor really is open. If anyone would like to unmute and speak, please just raise your hand so that I can call on you. Thank you, Charles, for drawing our attention. I was personally struck also by the role of the community in pushing for education technology, how parents, teachers, religious bodies all sort of came together. Those that, like Charles is saying, were committed to making sure the children were still learning even during the school closures. how they all came together to ensure that learning was going on, however they could manage it. So thank you so very much. There was one question in the chat box, but I believe Raymond has addressed it about the role that district assemblies in the various research districts played to support EdTech activity, especially in the rural areas. And unfortunately, the researchers were not able to get that because they couldn't engage GES at the district level without approval from GES at the national level. So thank you. It's well noted, and hopefully we'll be able to work on that in the future. Okay, there's a question from Abdul from World Reader. He's asking, how would you describe the possibilities of technology intervention for teacher professional development, or basically training, instead of F2F? Okay. Sorry, I see you've unmuted. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah. Before I comment, let me quickly say that we did some work around the deployment of virtual learning in College of Education, in colleges of education. And at the back of the question that just came, the colleges are, as a matter of fact, prior to COVID, they were doing a form of blended learning. So they were one of the most prepared institutions for migrating lessons onto virtual learning platforms. Not only lessons, but then their schooling. And so probably because of the work they were doing with TTEL was supporting teacher training and teacher College of Education with virtual learning systems and technologies prior to COVID. And that process accelerated when COVID kicked in. So in many of the institutions, they are doing blended learning. They are having lectures on various Google Blackboard and various virtual learning platforms already. I'm also aware that through the review of their curriculum, virtual learning systems and technologies, I'm talking about the skills required to teach and assess, has been incorporated into their curriculum. What remains is an effective implementation of that curriculum, so to ensure that teachers, teacher trainees after graduating, possess the requisite skills to instruct and assess in virtual learning. But let me quickly add, what I was coming to say was that there are so many interventions, so many splinters, so many pieces of amorphous interventions in virtual learning. So many, about 80 of them. Everybody's doing something. Everybody's doing something. A lot of them are duplicitous. I keep asking, who is coordinating this? There is no central agency coordinating the deployment of virtual learning in Ghana, even within the pre-tertiary space. Everybody is doing something, and I get worried because if there's an agency, a state agency responsible for doing that, and you find that everybody, both within the public sector and then also the civil society sector, corporate Ghana, are doing various interventions. At a point, there must be a melting point. There must be a point of confluence where the midfield that being sent laws coordinates and harmonizes all these virtual learning interventions to ensure that we don't duplicate, to ensure that we allocate resources, prudently to the benefit of the entire education system. So it will be great to have a recommendation that targets the harmonization of this super amorphous virtual learning landscape. Every project is doing something. Let's bring them together and see how all this can confluence within a broad, virtual learning, the ministry's virtual learning policy, so that we can avoid any duplication, and strengthen the effectiveness of their impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just 1 second. Kate, with regards to the question about teacher training, teacher professional development, Kate Radford wants to comment on that. Please go ahead, Kate.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And it may be interesting for people to have a look at. The EdTech Hub has recently conducted a meta-analysis of 170 evaluations into how technology can be used in teacher professional development. And there's a lot that we don't know yet, but some of the very key items, and one is most certainly the point that Kofi Azare made, is that coordination is key, and making sure that the teacher professional development fits in with other interventions that are designed to improve learning outcomes for children at a systems level. But I think what's interesting in what has come out from the meta evaluations across the 170 is that what can make the use of technology promising is obviously that it's blended, that obviously it's a hybrid approach is helpful. So some face-to-face, some blended. Really designing together with the teachers themselves. So making sure that the teachers are working together and saying how they wish to learn and what's useful for them in terms of using technology to increase their own learning. Adapting for context, as you may have experienced in Ghana, sometimes learning materials for teachers may be taken from other contexts which aren't appropriate. Also, encouraging peer learning and allowing teachers to actually work among themselves to encourage and build their own motivation and confidence to use technology, and a lot of practice in technology. If we look at what we don't know from a research perspective about what works and doesn't with education technology and teacher professional development, is that there's a lot more that we can do, and I hope that we can look at this together with you in Ghana, is to what is the link between teacher professional development and learning outcomes. I mean, that's obviously very complex research, but it's very necessary research. Also, and coming back to the theme which Kofi and other people have emphasized, is to really look at how do you design the teacher professional development to engage more, and it's always difficult to find the words, but more marginalized teacher groups. Perhaps in the case of Ghana, you do keep mentioning rural teachers, etc. How to actually collaborate with them better. And also, and this is probably something to look at, is how to measure cost effectiveness of these approaches. How do hybrid approaches that have face-to-face learning and technology compare with some more traditional approaches which may have emphasized more face-to-face? We need to do that work, because I think what's important with technology is not technology itself, is it making a difference, and is it making a difference so that those students who are marginalized have more opportunities, but also those teachers who are marginalized and perhaps normally cut out also have different opportunities. So I can share the research or the review in the chat, but these are the kind of things that are coming out globally. Thank you.
All right, so just to add to that, and also to address Abdul's question, I think with in terms of building the capacity of teachers, I think two things come to mind. I think we have to look at the cost implication, and then also the sustainability of it. I think most of the teacher training programs that I've heard of, it's where they normally ask that the school send a representative from the school to attend a workshop or something, a seminar or something in the cities or at a centralized location. So in this case, just maybe one or two teachers go, and then how they are able to pass down that knowledge to others is something that we need to look at. But from empirical evidence that we gathered, I think some teachers even did mention that sometimes even the facility or the process of getting them to such places without TNT or the kind of remuneration they get afterwards is not the best. And therefore, just like the way students or people could learn from remote learning, those programs could be telecast as well, so that you don't need to move from one place to the other. But I mean, once you're able to join or connect, of course, internet will then be an issue, but that way you're able to reach more people in the school and not just one or two teachers who are representing the school.
Thank you very much for coming in with that, Raymond. And thank you also, Kate. I'm going to be very wicked again. The director of AfriKids is on call with us. David, we can't wrap this up without hearing from you. Can you please unmute and let us and share your contributions and your thoughts on the discussion so far?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. From AfriKids' perspective, this is a great assignment, and we are excited to be a part of it. Considering where we are located, I mean, we work literally with very rural schools and hard to reach communities. And so for us, remote learning opportunities are the way forward. And so today is a very exciting moment for me to be a part of this conversation. What we will want to say is that we want to appeal to key stakeholders, partners, and of course, governments to try as much as possible to extend remote learning opportunities for our teachers who are located in very hard to reach communities. In fact, these are some of the reasons why teachers would not want to accept posting to some of our communities because of the lack of continuous learning and opportunity for their professional development. But if we are able to expand facilities and opportunities and platforms where teachers, irrespective of wherever they are located, they will have an opportunity to add on and to continuously develop their skills, I believe that they wouldn't really be too bothered about where they are located and where they will be working. So this is a single intervention that has a potential to resolve so many things, be it teacher deployment, learner outcomes, and so on. So we will want to ask for many more of these platforms and to continue to urge that let's enhance infrastructure, let's extend electricity, let's extend internet services, and some of the tools that teachers and schools will require to be able to connect and to keep learning so that the performance of our children will improve. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, David, for those. We will be coming up back to Kofi to wrap up with us with some forward-looking reflections. But before we come to him, we want to hear from Edem, the Managing Director of PDA. He's on call with us, and we want to hear his contributions. Please go ahead,
Thank you very
Edem.
much, Asida and the team for this great work. I think one thing that is emerging critically is how well can we get this the EdTech solutions in various forms as they are and they are coming actually to be part of our education delivery system. During the height of the pandemic, myself and Clement, we were doing a study where we were analyzing the speech of the president anytime he's giving to see what is the provision for education and what is the effect of that on education. One thing that we noticed is more the effective facilitation of EdTech it's more an issue about Ministry of Education, GES, providing the policy directives and implementation. The teacher training colleges, how well can we get teachers at the time of training to start appreciating various EdTech solutions and platforms? Because if we are building some of these platforms that have direct human interaction during delivery, then education facilitators and trainers must also know how to get conversant with some of these platforms and some of the e-delivery skills as well. And then how do we get homes to appreciate the need for this so that children can actually participate? Because ownership of devices, particularly in middle and low income households, is actually mainly by adults, and children actually feed on the devices owned by adults. And if there is one television in the house, how do we make sure that adults or parents appreciate that, so that the children can actually have time to learn as they ought to? These are very critical things, but then what is critical more also is how well we gather some of these evidences as we've started to be engaging the key stakeholders, so that we also provide more information from perspective of users, facilitators, so that the policymakers can actually be able to uptake some of these evidences to improve upon it. Because the reality now is that EdTech solutions have come to stay in various forms and in various ways, and we just have to see how best we can ensure that there is a fair and equity facilitation and distribution of these solutions, so that children can actually learn and quality education can be improved. Thank you.
Thank you also very much, Adam. We are grateful that you and Clement had the thoughts to even start investigating this. That has been the seed and the foundation for all these discussions. All too soon, our time is getting almost fast spent. We don't want this to just be a talk shop where everyone has shared lots and lots of different ideas. So we want to call on Mr. Asare once more to wrap everything up for us and try and put it all together for some of the policy implications for the sector that he sees that we can implement. So Kofi, if you're still on with us, please take over. Okay, I think that he has dropped off. Right, so Grace. Work was probably troubling him, and he's no longer with us. So we can try and bring this to a close. Clement, perhaps we can take your closing remarks and discussion on all the discussions that we've had so far. Over to you.
I mean, I think I was really looking forward to Kofi's closing remarks, because usually I like listening to him and his cutting edge ideas. Nevertheless, it looks like technology wasn't our best friend today in that regard, even though we are talking EdTech. So look, I think the discussions so far have been really interesting, and it's partly because we all recognize the potential, but also the limits of EdTech in the context of Ghana and, for that matter, many developing countries. I must add, before I go into any thoughts on like forward-looking thought, that all the critical comments about Ghana government response, the government not being prepared, Minister of Education not being prepared, and the responses being knee-jerk response, I think it's not very unique to Ghana. I think COVID really shook almost every system across the world. And I guess Ghana's wasn't the worst, but could have been better considering the history of Ghana and the all the investment that have gone into those spaces. And one thing that always keeps coming back is that even as CENDLOS, I think Center for National Distance Learning, even as it was established more than 10 years before COVID, it just wasn't well resourced and empowered to coordinate the kind of EdTech interventions that we would expect should be happening in the midst of COVID. And that is one thing that has brought us where we are, where some of the interventions were good, but were not equitable enough to capture everyone across the country. One thing that I think Kofi mentioned, which I'm sure he would have mentioned as well in his closing remark, is the fact that there are so many EdTech interventions that makes it almost impossible to have common direction and purpose. And so going forward, I guess one advocacy we could highlight is, to see whether there's a way of harmonizing all those interventions to give direction and purpose. And simply to make sure they are not just scattered, and every private individual, every government, bilateral government is trying to make an intervention. The challenge with that is that it could truncate innovation in the space. And sometimes in many cases in Africa, but especially even in Ghana, when you talk about centralization, often the outcomes are often not like ideal. So you'd want to see more decentralization and democratization in the space. But what balance are we willing to take between having some harmony and having some chaos in the space? So those are our conversations we need to carry forward. But I think it's still very clear that in spite of the best intentions of government and all stakeholders, there are still very important, very conspicuous equity questions we need to answer, considering that the rural population is substantially higher than the urban populations across the country, and EdTech necessarily relies on some of the modern technology that is just only available in the cities. Even if you take electricity as a common denominator across the board, very few areas in the country have adequate electricity to support even radio. Radio can be wireless. You can use DC, but to support things like television, internet, and stuff that are necessary for EdTech. But we probably need to think about other innovations of doing EdTech without some of those infrastructure constraints. Yeah, and there were a few questions about how do we go from here? How do we want to engage with local communities? I think there was a question from, trying to look up that person, a question from Robert Tanti, who was asking about whether we share the findings with stakeholders in the local communities. I think that's what he meant. We did invite many of the people we engaged in the district. I'm not sure yet how many of them were able to make it today, but that obviously will speak to the question of technology and internet constraints. But yeah, we will see how we can disseminate across the board to the local communities as well. But this is more, we're thinking of this conversation more as, national level stakeholders, civil society, just hearing what is there. Some of them we already know, but also looking into what we have and reflecting upon what we are doing and what can be done to engage with the private sector, to engage with government. So hopefully this conversation has triggered further conversations, further thoughts, which we can carry forward into the future. So, I mean, that's really it from me. Unless Kate wants to add something from the side of EdTech Hub, I think I'll just hand over the baton to you, Asada.
Clement, I think you've done some wonderful rounding up there. So I'll leave you with the last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah.
And Clement, and thank you to our researcher who presented, Raymond. I know it was a team effort. There were lots of them behind the scenes. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for coming and being with us today, for all your contributions. We really are looking forward to being able to harness all that we've discussed today into the policy brief. So do look out for that. We've shared the report as well, and we will be sharing with those who didn't get access to it, but it's also available on our website, pdaghana.org. do feel free to continue the conversation through social media and any of the other platforms. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. We are grateful that you spent your time with us. I believe that we have come to the end of this event, and have a wonderful rest of day for each one of us. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Goodbye.